What up, YouTube? It's your boy, Bishlo, IRL. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Please don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when I drop new content. If you want to bless this channel, you can bless this channel at Cash App, $BISHLO. All right, let's get into it. Today we're going to be discussing this case of the Alexander brothers. You may or may not have heard of this case, but today is what we're going to be discussing. This video is for educational purposes only. On March 9th, 2026, brothers Tal, Oren, and Alon Alexander were found guilty on all counts in a federal sex trafficking trial in Manhattan, New York. The high-profile real estate moguls were convicted of a years-long conspiracy to drug and GRAPE dozens of women. A little bit about the trial and conviction. The verdict: a jury of 12 found all three brothers guilty of sex trafficking, sexual exploitation of a minor, and aggravated sexual abuse. The charges: prosecutors alleged the brothers used their wealth and status to lure victims to luxury homes and parties, where they were drugged with substances like Ambien, edibles, and GHB before being assaulted. Take a breath, y'all. And here's some key evidence. The trial featured testimony from 11 women and 21 other witnesses. A significant piece of evidence was a video recorded by Oren Alexander showing the assault of an incapacitated 17-year-old girl in 2009. Take a breath. The stance of the defense. Their attorneys argued the brothers were womanizers, but that all sexual encounters were consensual and that accusers were motivated by shame, regret, and greed. The Diddy defense. The Diddy defense. All right. Now, Tal, who's 39, and Oren, who's 38, formerly top-ranked luxury real estate brokers at a firm named Douglas Elliman, who founded the Alexander team. They were famous for record-breaking deals, including the $238 million sale of a Manhattan penthouse to billionaire Ken Griffin. Alon, 38, who was Oren's twin brother, served as an executive at the family's private security firm, Kent Security Services. Sentencing is scheduled for August 6th, 2026. All three brothers face a minimum of 15 years and a maximum of life in federal prison. All right, let's get into it.
Right, disclaimer. Disclaimer: under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Because we have both criminal and civil charges happening. The federal government has indicted the Alexander brothers for sex trafficking schemes, and at least 17 women have filed civil lawsuits against the Alexander brothers. But before we start, a quick disclaimer. These three men have not been found guilty of anything. At this point, they have only been charged, and the details of the cases are simply allegations. For
This
the
is before
record,
the verdict.
I believe these women. And I don't just believe them because they're women. I believe them for a lot of reasons. There's far too many victims coming forward with stories that are far too similar to be coincidences, and while everything coming from everyone might not be true, there's no doubt in my mind that a lot of it is true, based on supporting evidence and the fact that this feels like it was an open secret. Like everyone knew what was happening, but no one wanted to get involved or rock the boat, or maybe they thought it wasn't their problem. All three men had pleaded not guilty, and their lawyers have made statements to discredit the accusers and downplay their accusations. Tal Alexander's attorneys Milton Williams and Deanna Paul have called the lawsuits a cash grab, saying, quote, "For months, we've watched orchestrated efforts encouraging women to profit from past sexual experiences with the Alexander brothers. These frivolous lawsuits, filed days before the law's look-back window is set to expire, are a transparent attempt at a cash grab," end quote. And this is pretty much the opinion that all the attorneys for all three brothers share. Their narrative, their standpoint is that all of these encounters were consensual. There's no evidence that any of these women were drugged, and these women and their lawyers are lying and taking advantage of something called the Adult Survivors Act, or ASA. ASA is a New York state law that temporarily lifted the statute of limitations for certain sexual assault cases, allowing survivors of sexual abuse to file civil lawsuits against their abusers and institutions that may have enabled the abuse, regardless of when the abuse occurred. The law created a one-year look-back window from November 24th, 2022 to November 24th, 2023, during which adult survivors of sexual abuse could file lawsuits even if the statute of limitations had already expired. There was a similar law for child abuse victims passed in 2019, I believe, but ASA, or the ASA, was specifically intended for victims who were 18 or older at the time of their abuse. If a victim missed the ASA window, they still had other options to pursue justice if they were filing their lawsuits in New York City. In 2021, the New York City Council approved the Gender Motivated Violence Act with a filing deadline of March 2025. According to Gothamist, not all sexual assault survivors will be eligible under the city law. They would have to prove that someone used violence against them because of their gender, but the look-back window in this act mirrors the Adult Survivors Act. But as I said, it is not set to expire until March 1st, 2025. So I'm a bit confused about why these lawyers are highlighting these laws as a reason for the victims coming forward. These victims cannot bring criminal charges against their accused attackers. They can only file civil lawsuits seeking damages, and we all know how hard it is to prove abuse of this nature in general, much less in a civil court. But also, the statute of limitations in New York is already quite lengthy, and based on the timeline of the Alexander brothers' alleged crimes, many, if not most, of these cases and these accusations would still fall in that statute of limitations window, both criminally and civilly. That window is 20 years. There's other complications and sort of different context, but about 20 years. That's what you would expect to see. So a lot of these women coming forward, they're still within that statute of limitation window. Oren, Alon, and Tal Alexander have been accused of multiple crimes at this point. Now, according to the federal indictment, the three brothers have conspired in a sex trafficking scheme for at least 14 years. They conspired with the other men and arranged events as well as domestic and international trips as bait to recruit, entice, and transport women whom they later sexually assaulted. Here is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams, announcing the indictments against the Alexander brothers on the day that they were arrested, which was December 11th, 2024.
Today I'm announcing a 3-count indictment charging 3 brothers, Alon Alexander, Oren Alexander, and Tal Alexander, with sex trafficking offenses. As alleged in the indictment, the Alexander brothers agreed together to traffic, rape, and sexually assault more than over a decade, multiple women. Let me say more about the charged criminal activity. The indictment alleges that between at least 2010 and at least 2021, the Alexander brothers worked together and with others to repeatedly and violently drug, sexually assault, and rape dozens of female victims. The Alexander brothers reside primarily in New York and Miami. And as alleged, Oren and Tal Alexander were real estate agents who focus on ultra-luxury markets. Alon Alexander, who was Oren's twin, was an executive of a private security firm owned and operated by his family. As alleged, the defendants used their wealth and positions to create and facilitate opportunities to sexually assault women. In particular, Oren and Tal Alexander allegedly used their prominent positions in the real estate industry to induce women to come to events and parties. At those parties, and sometimes afterwards, the women were sexually assaulted by one or more of the defendants. As alleged in the indictment, for years, the Alexander brothers, sometimes with others, also arranged domestic and international trips
for years
to carry out their sex trafficking scheme. To recruit and induce women to come on the trips, they provided material benefits, things like travel to vacation destinations, luxury accommodations, and access to other high-end experiences. As alleged, the Alexander brothers met their trafficking victims through a variety of means: in person, over social media, on dating apps, and through social connections. At times, they allegedly used their social connections or the guise of starting a relationship to lure women into their orbit. The indictment alleges that after meeting their victims, the Alexander brothers would invite the victims to a vacation property or location. The Alexander brothers and other men they planned the trips with paid for the flights or accommodations for the women on these trips. And at times, the defendants handpicked the women to invite. At other times, they used paid party promoters to source women for them.
Predators.
The indictment also alleges that in advance of these events, the Alexander brothers and others procured drugs that they agreed to provide to the women, including cocaine, mushrooms, and GHB. As we allege, these drugs caused some of the women to be physically unable to fight back or to escape.
Right.
Then, as alleged, the Alexander brothers, sometimes acting alone, sometimes with each other, and sometimes with other men, forcibly raped and assaulted the women.
My God.
So some pretty heinous stuff, objectively. And we're going to go deeper in it, and it gets pretty bad. I also want to point out, before we go any further, that I have noticed in this case, a lot of people who talk about it are accused of being anti-Semitic based on the Alexander brothers' background and religion. And I'm here to tell you, don't pull that nonsense with me. Don't do it. In my eyes, assholes are assholes, and violent and dangerous people need to be exposed and called out and stopped, no matter who they are or what they believe in. And it is my belief that these three men were able to get away with their horrible actions for so long because they were wealthy, because they had friends who were wealthy and powerful, because they had family who was wealthy and powerful, and because they hid their hideous natures beneath a polished facade of expensive haircuts and tailored suits. Allegedly, don't come for me. This is obviously just my opinion. As I said, these three men have not been found guilty of any crimes. But this case does deserve a deep dive into the backgrounds and histories of the Alexander brothers, because according to federal prosecutors, their investigation shows the brothers' violent behavior began when they were just teenagers, attending high school in Miami, Florida. So who are the Alexander brothers? What sort of lives did they live? How did they rise to such prominence in the circles of the rich and the famous? And how did their alleged crimes go undetected for so long? As always, to understand what happened at the end, we have to go back to the beginning. And that is going to bring us to Miami Beach circa 1980s. According to JewishMiami.org, quote, in the 1970s, about 80% of the population on Miami Beach was Jewish. By 1980, the greater Miami Jewish population reached its all-time peak of 230,000 with a full array of Jewish organizations. Miami became the new Ellis Island for people fleeing troubled countries. End quote. Two of those people were Shlomo and Orly Alexander, who immigrated from Israel with very few resources, hoping to find their American dream in sunny South Florida. In 1982, not long after arriving in Miami, the couple came up with the idea for a business called Kent Security Services while sitting together at their kitchen table. Kent began by offering security services to homeowner and condo associations, but it wasn't long before the company was receiving contracts from local and state government and organizations. The Herald found that the state of Florida has awarded Kent more than $6 million in state contracts over the past 5 years, and these contracts were mainly for providing security at government buildings. And in 2020, Kent Securities signed a contract with the city of Miami that was estimated to be worth $34 million annually. As part of this agreement, Kent Securities provided services to the Miami-Dade School District. If Shlomo and Orly arrived in the States with very little to nothing, their fates would soon change, and the couple quickly became very influential in the Miami area and very wealthy. Once the security company was doing well, Shlomo Alexander turned his attention to real estate. The 1980s were a period of dramatic growth for Miami's real estate sector.
He diversified.
The city was heavily impacted by the cocaine trade, which resulted in a cash-flooded economy, rapid real estate development, and, at times, economic volatility. Miami had become the epicenter of the U.S. drug trade, with powerful cartels smuggling massive amounts of cocaine from South America, and these drug lords and money launderers used Miami real estate to clean their illicit cash. This created an artificially high demand for luxury homes, condos, and commercial properties. Now, the 1990s saw Miami transitioning from a crime-ridden city to a global real estate hotspot as the drug wars faded and the city's skyline began transforming with the development of luxury high-rises along Brickell and Biscayne Bay. International investors, including many from Latin America, saw Miami as a safe haven for their money amid political instability in their home countries such as Colombia and Venezuela, and these people purchased luxury condos and commercial properties, fueling Miami's emergence as an international financial center. Shlomo Alexander most likely saw the golden opportunity that was presented to him, that lay before him, and he began building and renovating luxury homes and condos, eventually partnering with two of his sons, who would one day become young up-and-comers in the real estate business themselves. Now, Shlomo has previously stated that his sons, all three of them, got into real estate at a very early age, saying, quote, "They would run around with me when they were still kids at the construction sites, already negotiating with people," end quote. And Oren Alexander told the New York Post in 2013, quote, "My father is a residential developer, and I started seeing his work at a very young age, checking out incredible construction and architecture while my friends were doing math homework," end quote. So Shlomo and Orly Alexander, obviously the Alexander brothers' parents, they would go on to build a multi-million-dollar business and real estate empire in Miami over the ensuing decades, and the family's holdings include waterfront mansions in Bal Harbor and Miami Beach, along with a 48-acre ranch outside of Aspen, Colorado. So what I want you to take from this is that not only were the Alexanders very wealthy in Miami, and very influential, mostly because of their wealth, but they also worked closely with the state government and the city of Miami's government. So they have contracts through their security company with Miami and with Florida. And that may play a part in the Alexander brothers' early years in Miami, which we are going to talk about in a minute. In 2008, Oren and his older brother Tal moved to New York City together to launch their real estate careers. Now, Oren and Alon were twins. Tal was a year older than them. So Oren and Tal, they go on to New York City to become real estate agents, to become brokers. And I have a feeling, because these brothers were raised with so much privilege and seeing their father have so much success in business and not really understanding the hard work that goes into that because they were just children, maybe they thought it would be easy, right? They would just show up in New York City and the money would just start rolling in. But apparently, surprise, surprise, it wasn't that simple. Oren did secure an interview with Douglas Elliman Realty, and I'm going to come back to this after I tell you what he told the New York Post about this interview. But he told the New York Post, quote, "I always imagined that I would sign with a development firm and receive a typical starting salary and grow in the company. But it was 2008 and Lehman had just collapsed. I was so clueless that when I was introduced to Howard Lorber, the chairman of Douglas Elliman, my first question was what my salary would be. He chuckled and informed me that real estate brokers work on commission. I would be an independent contractor," end quote. So when I say that he got an interview with Douglas Elliman, which is a big brokerage firm, It really didn't work like that. He didn't go to New York and show up at their office or make connections while there or just fill out an application and hope to get a call back like anyone else. Once again, because of his family, because of who his family was, because of who his father was, he was actually introduced to Howard Lorber because Howard was in Miami looking at a property that Oren's father owned or was developing. So this is how they met, right? It wasn't like Oren went to New York and filled out an application and waited for a call back or, did any legwork to be able to secure this interview or this position. Some people would call this nepotism. I'm not saying I'm calling it that. I'm just saying that some people would call it that. So Oren was obviously hired, and it seemed that working on commission motivated him to go big or go home. When he was just 21 years old, Oren brokered the sale of an $8.2 million penthouse at the Park Imperial in Manhattan to well-known Miami attorney Jim Ferraro, who would later say, quote, "It definitely crossed my mind at the time that Oren was so young, but I started my law firm 3 years out of law school, so I started young too. He got me a great deal. The numbers were really good, and they got a write-up in the New York Post because the market was dead at that time. And my place today is worth double what I paid for it," end quote. By 2019, Oren and his brother Tal were star brokers at Douglas Elliman, a prominent real estate company that has 113 offices across the country, and they would eventually found the Alexander team there in 2012, at which point the brothers oversaw 10 brokers and were involved in record-breaking real estate transactions. A March 2019 article in Vanity Fair states that since January of that year, the brothers had worked on 3 deals worth nearly $500 million. There was the January 21st sale of a London mansion to billionaire Ken Griffin, which sold for $122 million, the highest recorded purchase in that city since 2011. There was the January 23rd sale of a New York City penthouse located at 220 Central Park South, which went for $238 million, the most expensive home ever sold in the United States. This was a property that also went to Griffin, and I had to look it up and see who this Ken Griffin person was, because within a few days this dude paid $360 million for 2 lavish homes located in completely different countries, which is outrageous to me. And I wanted to know, is he Bruce Wayne? What's the deal with Ken Griffin? And according to Forbes, Ken Griffin founded and runs Citadel, a Miami-based hedge fund firm that manages $63 billion in assets. Citadel Securities is one of Wall Street's biggest market-making firms, and it is responsible for 1 of every 4 stock trades in the U.S. And at just 56 years old, Griffin is worth $44.2 billion, which is bananas. Then, on February 1st, 2019, the Alexander team represented the seller of a $50 million mansion in Miami, which went to an undisclosed buyer. Forbes also reports that the brothers helped sell a $15.5 million condo to Kim K and Kanye in 2018. They represented billionaire Leon Black in the 2016 listing of his $18 million mansion, and they've represented other famous clients such as Steve Madden, Tommy Hilfiger, and Hamilton producer Sandra Jacobs. So how did these 2 brothers, who arrived in New York City with no client list and no reputation to get them in the door, end up earning the trust of so many rich and powerful people? Well, according to Oren Alexander, he was able to meet many wealthy clients by walking the walk and talking the talk. Specifically, he lived the way that they did, which meant going to expensive restaurants, getting into the most exclusive nightclubs, and knowing which international locales to be at and when to be there. Word of mouth made up 90% of their business, but the other 10 would come from showing their high-end clients that the brothers could, quote, play at the same level. The Alexanders' various social media accounts show them traveling to far-off destinations and living in the lap of luxury. New Year's in St. Bart's, vacations in Aspen, trips to Hawaii and Cambodia. Jay Parker, chief executive at Douglas Elliman's Florida brokerage, said, quote, Oren and Tal have a knack for being at the right event during Art Basel, at the right camp at Burning Man, and at the right party at the Oscars. They have the gift of gab. They work very hard. They're very disciplined, and they've been able to leverage their previous successes. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, and these guys never stop squeaking. End quote. In a 2012 article on Business Insider, Oren Alexander says, quote, I knew who I wanted to be, and to get there, I had to be selling big product. It's the only way to get recognition. Otherwise, you're just another real estate broker. I didn't want to be another rental broker. It's almost a negative thing to be a broker, almost like being a club promoter. There are so many of them, and it's hard to differentiate yourself. I wanted to bring a good reputation to the business, and I felt I could only do that on the high end. End quote. So this article also states that Oren worked alongside his brother Tal, and the partnership allowed them to avoid any scheduling conflicts that would arise from having listings in both New York and Florida. But Oren also worked with his father, Shlomo, the Alexander patriarch, who was still going strong in Miami. Quote, when Alexander is in Miami, he works with his father, a developer, on 2 homes he is building in Miami. One in Bal Harbour will be listed for $25 million when it's completed in 2 years, and the other on Indian Creek Island will hit the market for $35 million. Alexander is in charge of all the marketing for those properties and gives design and aesthetic input. His father handles the day-to-day. End quote. And this high-flying, high-risk, and high-reward lifestyle seemed to suit Tal and Oren, with Oren telling Business Insider that, quote, the average day for me is never the same, but I usually start with yoga or a run, then have breakfast with a client, and then meetings and showings all day. Lunches and cocktails turn into dinners, and the real work begins when I go out after. My late hours are my favorite part of the day, when I merge my 2 passions, meeting people and talking real estate. This is the time to bring in new business. My clients go to these absurdly expensive and elite places that no one can get into. I have my in. While my nights are late and some might call me a party boy, it's all about closing deals. Quite frankly, I'm addicted to my job. The hours, the lifestyle. I love that I get to hang out with the wealthiest people in the world. And it's considered work. End quote. Ugh, I find this all to be distasteful and kind of crass. It's giving Wolf of Wall Street. It's giving new money. It's show-offy and obnoxious. And it's not something that I would be attracted to or gravitate to in any way. But we know that the media shines a spotlight on people like this, so-called entrepreneurs who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps out of the slum of South Beach with your rich father and your real estate empire. With Oren and Tal Alexander being so young and some might say attractive, I wouldn't, but some might say they were, if you like that sort of finance bro aesthetic. The brothers became media darlings. In 2011, Oren and his twin brother, Alon, who we haven't talked much about yet, but we will shortly, they were named 2 of New York City's hottest bachelors by Gotham magazine. And that same year, Oren was put on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Different media outlets reported about Oren and Tal flying on a private jet to Miami, asking the question, what is it like to be one of luxury real estate's highest rollers at age 27? They were invited to speak at events. They were followed by the paparazzi. Their birthday parties were covered, in newspapers. They were guests on legitimate news shows.
This is like a red hot panel tonight. Let me tell you, Oren once sold the most expensive house in Miami's entire history, right? Some $47 million for one house. Oren, how's Miami doing? Florida was a mess. Is it coming back? There's the house you sold.
There it is, Jerry. Listen, the Miami market's on fire. I'm not just talking about the Miami Heat here. We're talking about Miami real estate. On the high end specifically, we have all of the whole world's wealth out here trying to vie for some of these handful of properties. We've broken this year alone the highest recorded sale price for a condominium in Florida history for $34 million. We've hit the highest recorded sale price per foot on condominium as well as single-family homes.
But my favorite piece of fawning garbage to come out of the media in regards to these men was a Details magazine article that wrote about Tal Alexander as if he was Jay Gatsby in the roaring 20s. Quote, it's early on a Tuesday morning in June, and the temperature's rising fast as Tal Alexander struts into the New York City bistro Balthazar, dressed in a charcoal linen Armani suit, his white shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. Tal removes his sunglasses, stops at several tables to press the flesh, and joins me for a pre-viewing breakfast. End quote. Ugh. So it's like, what is this? What is this? Is this like 50 Shades of Grey part 15? Awful. While his brothers built a real estate empire, Alon Alexander graduated from the University of Maryland with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. He also graduated from New York Law School in 2012, but by that time he'd already been working at the family business, Kent Securities, for a while. According to an article on theorg.com, quote, Alon lives and breathes Kent Services. He grew up in the business and worked his way up through the company, following the example of his parents and his uncle, Gil Newman. Alon began working at Kent at the age of 16, digging trenches and running wires for security systems. He's learned every aspect of the business hands-on, and over the years has expanded Kent's reach from South Florida to New York, D.C., Seattle, Portland, and Los Angeles, end quote. And as of 2009, Alon was listed as the president of Kent Securities. So 2022 was a big year for the real estate brothers, Oren and Tal. According to the realdeal.com, Oren and Tal left Douglas Elliman after a decade to launch their own company, Official Partners, a brokerage firm.
My brother and I felt that in our current position, or our previous role at Douglas Elliman, we felt that we weren't having the opportunity to differentiate ourselves from the brand of Douglas Elliman.
And you guys always had your own sort of philosophy about the business, right? I think the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is like travel to where the clients are, live their lifestyle, and in the process, sell some real estate.
Yeah, I'm actually next week off to Dubai,
Okay.
and then
My hometown.
and then Abu Dhabi for the Formula One race, followed by the opening ceremony in Doha for the World Cup. So we felt that the brand just wasn't there with us, meaning when we were going to these events and the people that we were meeting and the clients we were meeting, we were never proud to tell them we are at Douglas Elliman. We were at the Alexander team, and that was our brand.
Yeah.
And that was what differentiated ourselves from the other 6,500 agents. So for us, we felt that the segment of the market that we were attacking, which was truly the top end, that the brand just wasn't there with us because they were spread too thin.
In March of 2024, Official Partners launched an office in Aspen, and the road ahead was paved in gold for the Alexander family. That was until December of 2024, when Oren, Tal, and Alon were all arrested and federally charged with sex trafficking offenses. In a letter filed on December 11th, 2024, the date of the arrests, United States Attorney Damian Williams asserted, quote, for approximately 2 decades, the Alexander brothers have sexually assaulted, trafficked, and forcibly raped dozens of women. After relying on their substantial wealth and connections to carry out and conceal their crimes for years, all 3 defendants now face charges carrying potential sentences in prison of 15 years to life. End quote. That letter also goes on to say that for more than 20 years, the brothers, together and alone, repeatedly and violently raped and sexually assaulted multiple victims, and law enforcement had interviewed dozens of women who had reported experiencing these crimes at the hands of at least one of the Alexander brothers, and oftentimes at the hands of 2 or more of them, and oftentimes after being drugged. Quote, evidence from the investigation, including multiple victim and witness accounts, shows that the Alexander brothers began engaging in acts of sexual violence, including gang rapes, while still in high school in Miami, Florida. The government has interviewed multiple women who report being raped by at least one of the brothers in high school in the early 2000s, including victims who were raped by groups of boys, including the Alexander brothers. Several of these victims were given alcohol by one of the defendants or other individuals who participated in the sexual assaults. Each of the victims that the government has interviewed from this period reported hearing that individuals involved, including Tal Alexander, talked about the assaults at school, boasting about running train on their victims, and saying that they wanted to do it again. End quote.
Several video recorded statements obtained by NBC6 investigates 3 women described violent sexual encounters they say were committed by one or more of the Alexander brothers.
I was like, just because of what I just experienced, I love the rape, but just like how they were.
One woman whose identity is concealed told investigators she thought she was meeting Alon Alexander for a barbecue at a Miami Beach condo on December 31st, 2016, but instead found herself alone with Alon, twin brother Oren, and a 3rd man, Ohad Fisherman.
He did push me down and had his knees and hands on my shoulders.
She says Fisherman restrained her while first Oren and then Alon took turns raping her.
I was crying the whole time. I was asking her not to do it. I was just like, please no, please no.
Another woman told police Oren invited her to his home on Flamingo Drive in October of 2021.
I start pulling away, and as I'm pulling away, he starts to get more aggressive, kissing me more strongly, holding me firmly, and he ripped the top of my dress.
She says what started as a flirtatious encounter ended with him assaulting her.
He pushed me to his bed, and I laid there stiff, like in shock. And he got on top of me.
The woman who says she was attacked in 2016 confided in friends and family, according to the report, but she told investigators she was afraid of the brothers and to report what happened to police at the time.
They just had this weird presence about them. It was just very, very, very scary.
A third woman described meeting up with Oren in October of 2017 when she says he invited her to his place for a glass of wine.
I remember I hit the back of my dress, and I was on the bed, and I got scared, and I said, no, I'm not ready for this.
She says at one point she began to feel weak and a loss of control over her own body. That's when she stated he assaulted her.
I remember feeling really stressed out that I couldn't go home, and I could barely speak, and then I remember when I was crying, and I had tears that I said, I don't want to do this. And then he just told me to stop it and that we're having great sex.
All men are awaiting trial. We spoke with attorneys for Oren and Alon Alexander, who told us in a statement the accuser's stories will collapse not only under their own weight, but with evidence that will prove they are not believable. Aside from the obvious financial reward they are seeking after 8 years of not reporting to law enforcement, we will show evidence, witnesses, and motivations contradicting their stories.
And that's just fine, right? If the Alexander brothers and their lawyers can prove that these women are lying and making everything up, that is what a court of law is for. Because in this country, you have the right to launch accusations in a legal forum, and you have the right to defend yourself against accusations in a legal forum. And while the justice system is completely flawed and horribly broken, it's all we've got right now, at least. But earlier, when I said I believe these women, it's not just because they have such similar stories, which speaks to a systematic MO that most violent offenders do have, meaning that these violent offenders use the same tactics and methods with their victims. They do what they do because it works for them, and it has always worked for them. But I believe these women because of all the other people who have come out and said that everyone knew this was happening. Everyone knew these brothers were trouble, to say the least. For instance, when Oren and Tal launched Official Partners, they did so with the backing of Side, a real estate brokerage platform that allows agents to grow their own businesses. According to Side's website, quote, agents own their own companies, we take on the liability and handle their back office and recruiting, end quote. Not sure you want to take on the liability of the Alexander brothers, but okay. According to the New York Times, before the deal with Side was signed, there were at least 2 occasions during which concerns about the Alexander brothers were raised to leaders at Side. Brian Meyer, a broker who had worked with Douglas Elliman for 14 years, he claims that he was invited to dinner with Side executives, and he was asked what he knew about the sexual assault allegations against the brothers. And remember, this was in 2022, before the official and legal accusations started coming out, before the general public knew what the claims were and how many women would be making such claims. That means, in my opinion, there were rumors and stories already floating around pretty prevalently, I would say. Brian Meyer told the executives at Side that the rumors about the Alexander brothers had followed them for years and were, quote, considered an open secret in the industry, end quote. Brian Meyer, who is now working with Berkshire Hathaway, said, quote, Side knew about this stuff and still went forward with them, end quote, meaning they still signed the deal and agreed to work with them. Another broker in New York who has opted to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation has also claimed that she told Side executives that if they partnered with the Alexanders, she would not be working with them, Side and the Alexanders. So one executive that she told, Meredith Moore, brought this broker's concerns to Side's chief executive, Guy Gale. And Meredith Moore said, quote, I passed along the message, but there did not seem to be a sense of urgency. He did not bring it up again, end quote. And it's no surprise that Meredith Moore was relieved of her duties at the company a few weeks later during what has been called a round of layoffs. You know, she just fired a few weeks after she's bringing concerns of this criminal behavior. And there are many, many claims just like this. People knew, and it seemed like they knew, because the Alexander brothers didn't try to hide their actions. They seemed proud of them, and they wanted to talk about them, cradling the memories of their dirty deeds in their palms, like the trophy of a serial killer. Allegedly, in my opinion, don't come for me. Now, it's not clear, but these allegations seemed to stem back to an anonymous blog post that popped up on the internet 15 years before Oren, Alon, and Tal were charged with any crimes. The New York Times reported that this post asked the shocking question: does anyone know whatever happened to Oren and Alon Alexander, the two twins who raped that girl in that party back in 2003? End quote. The Times writes, quote, the post, which later disappeared from the internet, included graphic, specific details of a sexual assault, describing a victim running barefoot from a party before being treated at 2 different hospitals. Published on December 12, 2009, the blog post was made to look like a newspaper article. The New York Times could not identify who wrote the post and could not verify that the incident occurred, but the post tarnished the image that the twins had been cultivating as socialites and young men beginning their careers. Oren Alexander had just started working at Douglas Elliman, one of the largest real estate brokerages in the country, and Alon Alexander had joined his family's private security services company. As soon as the post was published, the brothers took an aggressive, multi-pronged approach to try to identify the person who wrote it and to scrub it from the internet, end quote. And we're going to talk about what that aggressive and multi-pronged approach looked like, but first, let's examine the allegations, the early high school allegations. In 2003, Alon and Oren Alexander were sophomores at Michael M. Kropp Senior High School in North Miami Beach, and their brother Tal was 1 grade ahead of them. And even in high school, the brothers had reputations for being, well, dicks, honestly. Like, rich, braggadocious dickheads. Let's be honest, we all know somebody like this. They did attend a public school. Kropp was a public school. But they flashed their money and privilege like they were badges of honor. Like these things, money and privilege, they made them better than their peers. They made the Alexander brothers better than the people around them. Curbed reports that the brothers went clubbing in South Beach. They drove Range Rovers to school, and they even threw the senior prom after party for their high school, even though at that time Oren and Alon were only sophomores. And the Alexander brothers were seen as bullies, with one former classmate saying, quote, if you had anything less than the lifestyle that they did, they took pleasure in making those people feel inadequate or belittled, end quote. Allegedly, Tal Alexander once had some conflict with a fellow tennis player, and he made threatening calls to this student's home, saying things like, oh, he was going to cut the brake lines on his car, saying he had placed a bounty on his head. And this is recorded in a police report. Tough little rich boy, Malibu's most wanted. So this is a public school. Like I said, Kropp was a public school. But the Alexander brothers had friends at a local private school, Miami Country Day. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, quote, more than half a dozen other women and men who attended Miami Country Day said people were frequently warned by fellow students to be careful around the Alexander brothers. The girls were told by their friends not to accept drinks from them at house parties. The people say. The warnings continued through the years. Many of the allegations against the brothers follow a similar pattern. Women or girls were told of a house party or gathering over the weekend, and when they arrived, they were the only guests. At times, the brothers or their friends would videotape or photograph the sexual encounters, according to the women and 2 men who had seen videos in high school, end quote. The Wall Street Journal continues its reporting, writing that in 2001, a 15-year-old female student at Kropp went to a party with Tal Alexander and some other friends. And at this party, Tal brought her into a room and raped her. She screamed no, she tried to push him off, but he continued, and after he was finished, she eventually was let out of the house in a state of undress as Tal threw her clothes out after her. She was able to retrieve her clothes and walk home, and at the time she did not report the incident because she said she didn't want to bring any more attention to it, but another student was told of her story by a person who was present at the party at the time. In 2003, a 14-year-old girl alleged that she too was raped by multiple boys, including Oren and Alon Alexander. The Wall Street Journal reported, quote, she was pushed down on a bed and the boys held her arms and legs in an X shape. She remembers struggling and didn't know what to do, so she tried to play along. They tried to take her pants off. She remembers seeing a camcorder. Someone opened the door. She ran out. 2 friends of the woman confirmed her account, which she shared with them at the time, end quote. There's a heavily redacted police report dated March 10th, 2003, that goes into some more detail. So remember, these 2 first victims that we're talking about are 15 years old and 14 years old. It's very understandable why, if something like this happened, that they wouldn't necessarily want to make a big deal of it at the time, that they wouldn't want to go to the police right away, things like that. They were very young, and it would be considered for them, even though it's not. I don't want it to get it twisted. I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying this, but in their perception, they would be ashamed of it. They would be wondering if it was their fault, if they'd done anything to encourage it, things like that. These are the ideas and thoughts that go through the brain of somebody who is a victim of sexual assault, especially when you're very young. So in the police report, it says that the teenage victim, this is a 14-year-old, had purchased 10 Xanax bars at school on the day of the incident. And then after school, when her father was not home, she smoked weed with a friend and took one of the Xanax bars. I didn't know what a Xanax bar was, so I looked it up. It's a slang term for a high-dose Xanax tablet, typically 2 milligrams in strength. So she and her friend then made arrangements to go to this party where the Alexander brothers were, and when they arrived, they walked into the kitchen where she put her Xanax bars on the kitchen counter and noticed that there was other Xanax bars already there. She then ingested an unknown quantity of Xanax and entered a bedroom with someone whose name was redacted in the report, but it's likely one of the Alexander brothers, right? There has been other reporting where it says it was the Alexander brothers, but in this police report, it is redacted. So the teenage victim and this person who brought her into this bedroom, they had sex, but she couldn't remember if she had wanted to have sex with him. And after they were done, she got dressed and 2 other males entered the room. She could not recall if she had sex with them, but she does remember leaving the room and re-entering again, at which point she dozed off next to someone whose name is redacted, at which time she asked for alcohol. Someone brought her a drink, and then she had sex with someone whose name is redacted. Ultimately, the victim engaged in sexual activities with multiple males, but later expressed uncertainty about whether she had consented. Her father later found her at this residence. She was in a bathtub, and he took her to Adventura Hospital, where she tested positive for Xanax and marijuana. The incident was reported to school authorities, leading to police investigation, during which the victim indicated she had been under the influence of many substances and could not recall a lot of details, but she mentioned feeling that the males took advantage of her condition. She identified several individuals using the school yearbook, and the authorities questioned the male students about that night. Several males admitted to having consensual sexual intercourse with the victim, but they denied forcing or coercing her into any activities. This is a 14-year-old girl who was clearly intoxicated by multiple substances. But, they didn't force it or coerce it or anything. So this 14-year-old girl did end up leaving her underwear and purse at the house where the assault allegedly happened, and the following Monday, a group of boys approached her at school and returned her purse to her, at which point she began crying. A security guard approached. He brought her to the school guidance counselor. The Wall Street Journal reported, quote, the North Miami Beach Police Department investigated the incident, interviewing several male students, including Oren and Alon. According to the report, besides her Xanax consumption, the freshman was also given an unknown alcoholic beverage while at the house. She was later accompanied by a detective to the Jackson Memorial Hospital's Rape Treatment Center and examined by a doctor. They brought their findings to the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Sexual Battery Unit. An assistant state attorney at the time dismissed it due to the inconsistencies of the statements made by the victim, contradicting witnesses, insufficient evidence, and the fact that the defendants admitted to having sexual intercourse with the victim. According to the report, the attorney has since died, end quote, the attorney that dismissed this case. Another woman who attended high school with the brothers claimed that in the summer of 2005, during Alon and Oren's senior year, she attended a party at their home. She said that Oren and Alon locked them all in a bedroom together, and then Oren sexually assaulted her while the others watched. She told her father about what had happened. He took her to the police station to file a report, but she did not end up pressing charges. Although the victim in this incident has asked to remain anonymous, a classmate at the time, Rose Martinez, also attended the party, and she said she saw the victim directly after her attack. Rose even helped this young woman get home that night. Rose Martinez told the New York Times, quote, "Everyone has been too scared to say anything. They held a lot of weight, especially in Miami," end quote. And like I said, it seems that the Alexander brothers were not shy about what they had done. Some might even say they were proud. Curbed reports, quote, "The girls at Crop and the nearby private schools in Miami were routinely warned by their brothers, by their friends, and even, one Ball Harbor resident says, by police officers, to be careful at parties with the Alexanders. If they ended up at one, they were told they should never put down their drinks. It was all rumor and speculation until it wasn't. Before the twins graduated, a recording began circulating at school. It allegedly showed the pair with a female classmate. Quote, "She was so fucked up and they took turns on her," end quote, says a former student. Former student continues saying, quote, "I specifically remember that they bragged about running a train on her. They used that phrase," end quote. In the December 11th letter, United States District Attorney Damian Williams asserts that the brothers talked about the assaults at school and did brag about running train on their victims. And in his high school senior yearbook, when Oren Alexander was asked what his most memorable moment at Crop had been, his response was, quote, "Riding my first choo-choo train," end quote. According to former classmates, there was a sense that the Alexanders were untouchable, and someone who knew one of the girls who had been assaulted said, quote, "People were called in to guidance counselors. It had gotten to the teachers. Did everyone just forget about this? I remember being pissed, really, really upset, thinking like, what the fuck is going on?" End quote. Reportedly, rumors of what the boys were doing even reached Kent's securities, with one former employee claiming that the brother's uncle asked him to act as an armed guard during an exchange between a lawyer and two teenagers at a Denny's on Biscayne Boulevard. This former employee said, quote, "There was a story going around about a girl being raped at a party by one of the brothers, and I kind of put two and two together in my head. It stuck with me," end quote. So let's return to that anonymous blog post in 2009. According to the New York Times, when these allegations appeared in that post, Oren Alexander sent threatening messages to the email address that was linked to the writer of the post. The Alexander brothers also hired an investigator specializing in cyber attacks. The Times also reports that within hours of that blog post going live, another blog post with the same title, "What Became of Oren and Alon Alexander," that appeared on the internet, and, quote, "This one was filled with glowing stories of volunteerism and hard work by Oren and Alon Alexander," end quote. Lawyers for the brothers were asked if their clients were responsible for the second very positive blog post, and they declined to comment. But I just have to make a quick side comment about that second blog post, because although it was obviously more favorable than the original, it sounds like it was written by a 7-year-old who is also kind of an asshole. In one part, it says, quote, "They do a number of social charity causes by helping out poors and making the poor people move forward," end quote. I mean, be so for real. Who wrote this? And it seemed like a lot of these like blog posts with all this positive stuff about the Alexanders started popping up after this first negative blog post did. And so I wonder if they like hired some like overseas kind of like bot people to start just banging out all of these blog posts and flooding the internet with positive stuff, because like, who wrote that? Come on, who wrote that? So Oren Alexander, like I said, he started to send emails to the email address associated with the writer. And on July 17th, 2010, at 1:56 a.m., Oren wrote, quote, "We got your IP address. We went easy on you before. That's it. Ha!" End quote. Now, the blogger actually responded shortly after at 2:04 a.m. And the blogger responded, quote, "Do you remember the rape?" End quote. The New York Times reports that Oren and the blogger sent back and forth at least 14 emails, and the conversation became tense. Now, it appeared that Oren believed the anonymous blogger was someone he had attended high school with, maybe somebody who had accused him of doing something, uncouth, because Oren says he's going to, quote, "have a talk with your parents," end quote. "I'm going to have a talk with your parents." And the blogger responded basically saying, like, "I don't think you know who I am. Like, I don't think you know who you're talking to." Maybe as in, like, "Hey, I'm not the person you think I am," or maybe, "Hey, like, I'm not the one. You better stop threatening me because I know about you." I don't know which way the anonymous blogger meant it, but either way, the blogger wrote back, quote, "What's the matter? Lost count of all your victims?" End quote. Now, at the time of this correspondence, Oren Alexander did not know who he was talking to. He did not know the IP address of this anonymous blogger because in January of 2011, the brothers reached out to Glenn Dardick, who was the private investigator, the one who'd been able to figure out the email address to begin with, and they asked, "Hey, you figured out the email address. Do you think you can find out what the IP address is?" So obviously when Oren was talking to this blogger and being like, "We have your IP address. We know who you are. We're going to get you. Ha!" He didn't know shit. It was just a bluff. So in December of 2013, Oren and Alon filed a lawsuit in a Florida court listing the defendant, which was the anonymous blogger, as John Doe and claiming this person had published false statements about them. They were granted a temporary injunction in January of 2014 and the blog was ordered to be removed. But while they were scrambling around trying to get the post removed and trying to combat the bad publicity with badly written good publicity, they were allegedly continuing their reign of terror on women. According to a March 2024 lawsuit by a woman named Rebecca Mendel, she was drugged, sexually harassed, assaulted, abused, and raped in or around September of 2010 by Alon and Oren Alexander. Her suit claims that she had met the brothers in 2009 at SL Nightclub in New York City. In the months that followed, Mendel ran into the brothers regularly, time and time again, at different restaurants, clubs, and events, and she ended up seeing them so often that she thought of them as acquaintances. On a night in September of 2010, she ran into them again at a nightclub. They started talking. Alon brought her a drink. And I said, brought her a drink purposely because he didn't just buy the drink. He asked if she wanted a drink. She said yes. He disappeared for several minutes, returned with the drink. So she never actually saw him order it, nor did she see it handed to him before he handed it to her. There was enough time for him to do something with the drink, to tamper with the drink, to put something in the drink, if you know what I mean. And this is, once again, an MO. Now, this was the only drink Rebecca Mendel had consumed that night, and she claimed that shortly after finishing it, she began to feel lightheaded, and her memory became hazy. Alon and Oren then took Rebecca to a party they said that their friend was throwing. They got a cab, got inside, and drove to an apartment building in Chelsea where this alleged party was happening. The lawsuit says, quote, "As defendants and plaintiff entered the building and made their way to the apartment door, plaintiff sensed something was wrong. The hallway was silent. There was no music, no voices, nothing that would indicate a party was being held at this location. At this moment, plaintiff realized she had been deceived. She'd been taken to the defendant's apartment," end quote. Rebecca said that she was upset, right? She's like, "You said you're bringing me to a party, but you're bringing me to your apartment." She wanted to leave, but the Alexander brothers told her, "Oh, don't worry. We're just going to hang out for a little while. Don't leave. We're sorry, blah, blah, blah." So Rebecca entered the apartment. She asserts that within minutes of being inside, their hands were all over her, and then they took turns raping her while the other brother held her down. Rebecca Mendel was just 18 years old at the time of this alleged incident. On October 16th, 2010, a woman named Jessica Cohen, who was an award-winning, very successful Douglas Elliman agent, she attended a birthday party at the Core Club in Manhattan, where she joined Oren, Alon, and Tal Alexander for a drink. Now, Jessica's important because it has been suggested that the Alexander brothers have an animus towards women, meaning they hate women, basically, right? They feel spiteful and resentful towards them. The sexual violence is never about sexual desire. It's always about power, control, and entitlement. Many rapists seek to assert dominance and control over their victims, using sexual violence as a tool to degrade, humiliate, and exert power. Basically, it's a tactic to put women in their place, and some men use it as a form of punishment for women who assert independence, reject them, or challenge their male authority. Now, this is not me pulling claims out of my ass. Go ahead and read the multiple studies done and papers written about this topic. See how many abusive and incarcerated men have said this exact thing. Because they've done studies, they'll go to prisons or like men's support groups and stuff for men who have been physically and sexually abusive, and they'll take polls and they'll say, "Hey, well, why did you do this? What motivates you to put your hands on a woman, to force yourself on a woman? What is it?" And they will say, like, "Oh, well, she's got to be put in her place. She's got to be, make sure she knows to stay in her lane. She can't feel like she's better than me. She can't feel like she's smarter than me." and she'll get away with too much, so I have to keep her down in a place where I feel comfortable with her being. It's true. It's true. They say these things, even if it does sound horrible, even if it does make you feel very uncomfortable. It's absolutely true. So that's going to bring me to the Bravo reality television series $1 Million Listing. In 2010, the network decided to bring their show, which was usually based in Los Angeles, to New York City. And of course, Oren Alexander auditioned to be on the show. Angela Weingard, the casting director, she says that Oren auditioned as a jet-setter playboy type. And she said, quote, I had him come up to one of his properties in a fancy car and get out and go on dates and stuff like that. He really wanted to be on the show, end quote. Ultimately, Oren was not cast for $1 Million Listing. Weingard said he was attractive, but not charismatic, all flash and no substance, some might say. A Potemkin village of a human being, some might say. Of course, Oren would later say that he had turned the show down. He said it wasn't in line with the Alexander brand. He didn't really care about reality television anyways. You didn't fire me, I quit. This is also, I think, a character issue or a part of his character that needs to be highlighted, which is a very, very insistent manner of making sure that nobody ever thinks you were rejected for anything, right? Because you're too good for that. You do the rejecting. You don't get rejected. But obviously, I think it's fairly obvious in my opinion that Oren wanted that spot on $1 Million Listing. And obviously, he would be salty about not being chosen, and maybe he would feel some sort of way about those who were chosen. 4 other New York brokers were chosen instead. One of those, and the only woman, was Jessica Cohen. So a few weeks after signing her contract with Bravo, Cohen attended the birthday party of Michael Lorber at Core Club on East 55th Street. We've already briefly talked about Michael Lorber, and we're going to talk more about him in a minute. That night, she said she was feeling a little anxious. She said, quote, I was nervous because I had been chosen, and I heard Oren was upset about it, end quote. Of course he was. Although she has no memory of the following 5 hours, time-stamped pictures taken by a friend show that she was with all 3 Alexander brothers late into the night. The New York Times reports that in one of these photos, Cohen is seen passed out on Tal Alexander's shoulder, holding his hand. The last memory that Jessica Cohen has from that night was being handed a drink by one of the brothers, and then they all boarded a private bus to attend an after party. Jessica Cohen woke up after midnight at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. The New York Times reported, quote, her vomit-covered clothes had been removed. A bystander had found her alone on the street and called 911, according to a medical report reviewed by the Times. Miss Cohen said that what she felt was very different than any alcohol-induced stupor. Quote, I woke up feeling like I came out of general anesthesia, end quote. For several days, Ms. Cohen struggled to piece together what had happened that evening, describing the details she could recall to a few colleagues, including Dottie Herman, Douglas Elliman's vice chairwoman, end quote. Of course, Douglas Elliman claims that Dottie, Miss Herman, has no recollection of speaking with Jessica Cohen about these allegations. Jessica Cohen said that 3 weeks later she was at an event for Gotham magazine when Tal Alexander walked up to her, took a drink out of her hand, and told her, you need to be careful with people's reputations. And this was a comment that she obviously interpreted as a threat. Now, a few years after this, in 2012, Jessica Cohen was playing chess with Howard Lorber, the president and chief executive of Douglas Elliman, where Jessica worked, where Oren and Alon Alexander were also employed. Now, during one of these chess games, because Jessica's not just a badass real estate agent and a broker, she's not just on $1 Million Listing, she's an amazing chess player. So during one of these chess games, Lorber took a call from Oren, and he gets off the phone, and then Jessica told him, you know, obviously it came up in conversation because Oren called, and Howard hangs up, and Jessica's like, hey, I believe that, you know, Oren and Alon had drugged me that one night at your birthday party. Now, allegedly, Jessica Cohen did ask that Howard Lorber not do anything with this information. And she said, quote, I was terrified, I was afraid they would hurt me, end quote. Douglas Elliman has given a statement about this claim, confirming that Howard Lorber recalled this conversation, but that Miss Cohen had claimed she did not remember exactly what had happened that evening, and, quote, she insisted on absolute confidentiality. Douglas Elliman respected her wishes, end quote. Oh, I'm glad you respected her wishes. You were not so concerned about protecting her, though, right? Moving on to the summer of 2011, when galleryist Lindsay Acree was a guest at a party in the Hamptons along with Tal Alexander. She says she consumed 1 glass of wine, and from that point on, the following events were all a blur. She said she has some memory of being pinned down in the sauna by Tal Alexander along with another man she had met for the first time at that party, but for at least 24 hours her memory was just blurry and mostly gone. She said, quote, "I have no idea what happened to me. I have no idea what happened to my body," end quote. Let's move on to May of 2012, when an individual named Kate Whiteman claims she was attacked by the Alexander brothers. According to her complaint, Kate Whiteman had met Oren Alexander in New York in 2008. He'd asked her out repeatedly, but she denied him every time, which is not smart to do, apparently, to a man who cannot stand rejection and who cannot live in a world where rejection is a part of his reality. Allegedly, just my opinion. Whiteman's lawsuit claims, quote, "On many occasions, Alon would sometimes pretend to be his twin brother Oren, trying to help his brother call or text plaintiff on Oren's behalf when she wouldn't agree to go out with him," end quote. Maybe Alon was more charismatic than Oren. Maybe if Alon had tried out for $1 Million listing, he would have gotten the spot. Who knows? So in May of 2012, Oren asked Kate if she would be spending Memorial Day weekend in the Hamptons, and she said yes, she would be. A lot of people from New York City go during like Labor Day and Memorial Day weekend to the Hamptons. And Kate claims that that weekend she was out with friends at a nightclub in the Hamptons when Alon Alexander basically approached her, took her by the hand, and led her into a waiting black SUV outside where Oren was waiting inside. So Kate was scared. She asked the twins where they were going. Quote, Whiteman recalled the twins refused to answer her questions and instead smirked at one another until they arrived at the castle owned by Ivan Wilczek, a musician who was known at the time for throwing wild parties at the property, end quote. So the property in question was known as Sir Ivan's Castle, and the whole thing is a rabbit hole we need to go down for a minute. According to the New York Post, quote, the cape-wearing Wilczek has been dubbed the Hugh Hefner of the Hamptons, while his lavish home, complete with dungeon, is referred to as the Playboy Mansion of the East Coast, and known for its annual sexy, over-the-top summer blowouts, end quote. So Ivan and his brother Alon are the sons of Holocaust survivor Siggy Wilczek. And in 1995, these two brothers purchased 5 acres of land in the Hamptons hamlet of Watermill, where prominent figures such as Jennifer Lopez live. So on these 5 acres, the brothers constructed a sprawling 15,000 square foot castle that they both lived in. And Ivan said, quote, one of the things that made the castle so unique is that it wasn't built by a couple, it was built by 2 brothers. So there are 2 master bedrooms, each of us in our own towers on the far left and the far right, end quote. So Alon got married and moved out a decade later, but Ivan stayed. Let's talk about the castle and what supposedly went down there. It's crazy. As far as Hamptons homes go, this place has it all, like most Hamptons homes do, right? But then it has more than it all. It's got a huge infinity swimming pool. There's a tennis court, home theater, putting green, wine cellar, nightclub, and a drawbridge. But that's not all. The castle also has a dungeon, and the tennis court features 24-karat gold leaf paint. The 8 guest rooms are all lavishly decorated and themed, like historical themes. The infinity pool showcases a nude dragon goddess sculpture flanked by a pair of cauldrons that shoot fiery flames over 5 feet into the air. It is the definition of opulence and excess, so it's not really a surprise to me that Ivan told the Post in 2011 that his decorators were Caligula and the Marquis de Sade. If you know, you know. Now that brings us to the dungeon, which a source has claimed included a bed with handcuffs, and the dungeon's also decorated with gold leaf, granite, and marble. And Ivan insists that this is not a sex dungeon, but that the space has 3 purposes. Quote, it's a dungeon for historical accuracy. That makes the castle a castle. Of course, you can't have a castle without a dungeon. Like, You need it for historical accuracy. He continues and says it's a changing area and cabana for the pool, and it's an 8-car garage. It's a strict rule that nobody ever screws in that room. The last thing I want to hear is that I have a sex dungeon, end quote. But the parties that Ivan held at his castle are legendary and allegedly lascivious. One source told the New York Post, quote, as a man, you'd have to have a girl with you. You get to the house, everyone had to take their clothes off and put this sarong thing on that Ivan has. You go in the pool and he says, it's time to go inside, and you get naked and you put your stuff in lockers. Ivan will be like, chop, chop. Everyone has to take their sarongs off. Chop, chop. End quote. According to the lawsuit filed by Kate Whiteman, once they arrived at the castle, Oren and Alon took her out of the SUV. They led her to a room inside the garage where they told her she needed to change into a sarong. She claims she attempted to escape by running to the stairs leading up to the house, but a security guard employed by Ivan Wilczek grabbed her and dragged her back to the garage. Oren and Alon then allegedly forced her to change. They placed her phone and other belongings into a locker, and then they brought her to a large bedroom where she was allegedly raped by them both. In 2014, Douglas Elliman broker Tracy Tudor, who was based out of the Los Angeles office, claimed she shared a drink with Oren Alexander at a cocktail party before blacking out. She said, quote, I am still struggling to remember the details. Staying silent for so long has been damaging on many levels, and remembering now what happened feels debilitating, end quote. A colleague from Douglas Elliman found Tudor in the restaurant's bathroom with Oren Alexander, and he got her out of there. And after this, that agent who found Tracy and saved her, he told a Douglas Elliman executive about the incident, but did not file a complaint. Now, this next lawsuit filed by a woman named Angelica Parker does get a bit more descriptive, so this is a trigger warning. She claims that in the fall of 2012, she was raped by Alon and Tal Alexander in a, quote, coordinated sexual assault that was planned and facilitated by Oren Alexander along with his brothers, end quote. The lawsuit goes on to say that Angelica Parker was orally and vaginally raped by Alon, and while he was vaginally raping her, his brother Tal orally raped her. Oren, who had planned the whole event, sat and watched while Miss Parker was raped by his brothers. Parker says that she met Oren in or around 2012. They briefly had a personal relationship. In the fall of that year, Oren invited her to his home in New York City, and this was an apartment he shared at that time with his 2 brothers. Miss Parker went to the apartment with a friend of hers, where she saw Oren and Alon. Tal was also present at the apartment, but she didn't see him at first and didn't know he was there. She claims that when they arrived, Oren and Alon asked if she and her friend wanted to take some ecstasy, and she and her friend said no. The lawsuit states, quote, Alon made drinks for Miss Parker and her friend. He then proceeded to start hitting on the friend and groping her. The friend became extremely uncomfortable and afraid and left the apartment. However, she was so concerned for Miss Parker's safety that she stayed in the apartment building in the stairwell. After the friend left the apartment, Miss Parker was raped by Alon and Tal Alexander. Specifically, Alon Alexander vaginally raped Miss Parker. While he was vaginally raping Miss Parker, Tal proceeded to forcibly, orally rape Miss Parker against her will. Despite her very clear verbal protests and inability to force him away on account of both her size and the fact that Alon was holding her down with his body weight, end quote. It gets even more graphic and descriptive, but I don't think it's necessary to continue as you get the very horrific picture. The lawsuit states that in the years following this, Miss Parker encountered the Alexander brothers often as they had mutual friends and acquaintances, and during this time the brothers made defamatory statements about her, telling their friends that they'd had sex with Miss Parker without explaining that the whole event was an orchestrated group rape. Angelica Parker further asserts that years later, Tal barged in on her while she was alone in the guest room of a house that they were both staying at, and he attempted to assault her again. Angelica began screaming and making noises that others in the house would be able to hear, and this prompted Tal to begin calling her the King's Rat because apparently she was responsible for getting him kicked out and removed from the house that night. The lawsuit also names other victims of the Alexander brothers, stating, quote, according to the lawyers representing Miss Whiteman and Miss Mandel, an additional 30 alleged victims have said that they too were raped by one or more of the Alexander brothers. This is sadly not surprising news to those who spent time with the Alexander brothers. Indeed, it was well known within Miss Parker's circle of friends and acquaintances that the Alexander brothers had a penchant for sexually assaulting women. Ms. Parker would learn that it was common knowledge that the Alexander brothers often forcefully raped women, drugged women, and tricked women into having sex by pretending to be one of their brothers. It was also common knowledge that when one Alexander brother was having sex with a woman, often another would join in uninvited and by surprise and sexually assault the woman. End quote. Moving on to 2015, actress and comedian Renee Willett has claimed that during that year she was drugged and sexually assaulted by Oren Alexander in his apartment. Her lawsuit says that in or around November of 2015, Renee met Oren through a private dating and networking application. She noticed they had mutual friends in common. The two matched, and after communicating for a few weeks through that app, Renee agreed to meet Oren in person on December 15th, 2015. She actually had a planned 23rd birthday celebration for herself with some of her friends that day. Renee and Oren planned to meet after this, and they were going to get together at the Mercer Hotel bar. But when she left her gathering, it was kind of late, and when she got to the Mercer Hotel, she realized the bar was closed, so she accepted the offer to meet Oren at his apartment, which was close by. The lawsuit claims, quote, when Renee arrived at defendant's apartment in the early morning hours of December 16, 2015, he appeared upset and acted cold towards her. Renee followed defendant into his apartment, and the two initially sat on his couch in the living room. Moments later, defendant offered Renee an alcoholic drink, which she declined and instead asked defendant for a water. After spending some time in the kitchen, defendant returned with a carbonated beverage. Although it was not what she had requested, Renee accepted and consumed some of the drink in an effort to be polite and break the initial awkwardness of their exchange. Next, defendant proceeded to give Renee a tour of his apartment to purportedly show her his art collection. After viewing the art in the living room, the defendant then led Renee to a room near the main entrance of the apartment. This room turned out to be the defendant's bedroom. Renee felt apprehensive about being in the defendant's bedroom due to an overwhelming instinct that danger was ensuing and immediately feared for her safety. As Renee started to walk back towards the door to exit the bedroom, defendant stepped in front of her, blocking her access to the door to prevent her from exiting. Renee attempted to sidestep around the defendant, but defendant aggressively stepped sideways and forward again in front of Renee. Renee, now terrified, backed up until the backs of her legs were pressed against the foot of the defendant's bed. Renee, shocked and gripped by fear, repeatedly pled with the defendant to stop his assault. Despite her protestations and attempts at resistance, Renee was overpowered. Defendant did not stop and forcibly vaginally raped Renee. End quote. Again, it gets more descriptive and vulgar, but Renee's lawsuit says that she felt physically impaired from the drink that Oren had given her, and she believes that he spiked her drink with an unknown substance. Moving on to 2016, we're going to return to the memo written by United States Attorney Damian Williams. This document claims that in or around August 2016, an unnamed woman and a friend of hers matched with Alon and Oren Alexander on a dating app. The brothers invited the two women, who lived in Illinois, to spend Labor Day weekend with them at their home in the Hamptons. The brothers purchased early morning flights for the women to fly to New York, and they actually have text messages exchanged between the three brothers where they discuss this. Alon, in this text, asks if they're booking flights, and then he says, quote, we split and try to orgy, then out, end quote. Tal responds, quote, for sure, last weekend, throw it up, end quote. Alon says, quote, I agree. Oren? End quote. And Oren replies, quote, all four? Why not? End quote. The document continues by telling us that a few days prior to this exchange, Tal had exchanged messages with two party promoters in a group chat titled Hamptons Hot Chicks. And he was arranging for hot women to stay at the Alexander brothers' Hamptons house that same weekend. At the end of the conversation, one of the promoters said, quote, I want photos of the girls naked, end quote. And Tal replied, quote, LOL, guys, we're going to have a lot of fun, end quote. After the two women arrived in New York, the brothers transported them to their Hamptons house by car and provided them beds in a space shared with other women. The next day, the brothers threw a party, and Oren gave his victim a drink, which the woman consumed before she began to feel strange, before she had a hard time walking. Quote, Alon assisted victim 2 inside the house and took her to a bedroom to lie down. Sometime later, victim 2 woke up when Oren entered the room. Oren put on a condom, pulled down victim 2's bathing suit, and climbed on top of her. Victim 2 was physically impaired and could not move. She also struggled to speak. Oren raped victim 2 and left the room, leaving her lying on the bed. When victim 2 woke up the next morning, she was still lying on the bed and her bathing suit was pulled down around her legs. End quote. The document claims that evidence in this case establishes that the Alexander brothers planned and paid for trips involving the interstate and international transportation of women on multiple occasions. And this evidence includes communications, including from the defendants themselves. Just weeks after victim 2's assault in the Hamptons in October of 2016, the brothers and their friends, other male individuals, were arranging to transport multiple women to Tulum, Mexico. And they had a WhatsApp group chat going titled Lions in Tulum. And in this group chat, the brothers and their male friends who would be on the trip to Tulum discussed the arrangements of getting the women there, as well as plans to get drugs there so they could give said drugs to the women. On October 3rd, an unnamed man in this group chat wrote, quote, "Going to start collecting for the pot to fly bitches down," end quote. Alon Alexander replied, quote, "There should be a fee per bang and after bang," end quote. The unnamed male said, quote, "Starting to collect Venmo for girls' flights," end quote. And Oren wrote, quote, "Oh yeah, what's the lineup? Need to pick winners. Can't be sponsor girls like ISIS," end quote. The unnamed male number 1, wrote back, quote, "LOL, it's gonna be hard to get girls up to your standard." Yeah, okay. And Oren replied back, quote, "Just warn him, your boys are hungry," end quote. Blech. Really gross, really gross. And then Tal responded, quote, "Girls look fresh," end quote. On October 4th, 2016, Alon is still talking about this, right? He's been thinking about it all night, and he's got some ideas. He said, quote, "I think we should all bring chicks and not rely only on promoters since we never met the girls. We need fun girls with good attitude. I'm sure we all met many recently this summer. Male 2, I know you know some winners." Male 2 is a second unnamed male in this group chat who just keeps getting referred to as Male 2, so they redacted his name. And then Alon responded, quote, "Hail Mary pass should be overload," end quote. Alon writes back, quote, "I say yes, chip in, and yes, bring others," end quote. Male 1, unnamed male 1 says, quote, "I don't want anyone being upset if they don't run a 10-man train,"
Oh my God.
end quote.
10-man train.
And then Alon responds back, quote, "I'm trying to cover all bases," end quote. Male 1 says, quote, "I just need to handle drugs," end quote. Tal says, yes. Male 1 says, "I don't want X around too much. Nothing gets done with that. Coke, shrooms, and G. X makes the girls want to chase the fucking party," end quote. GHB, right? The date rape drug. So Tal then on October 13th says, quote, "Photographers, drugs, question mark." Male 1 says, "All getting work done." Oren responds, quote, "Are all girls getting shipped out on Sunday?" End quote. Shipped out. And then male 1 says, yeah. Male 1 also says, "Feel free to extend a piece you like." And then Alon responds, quote, "Nut returns, end of trip," end quote. Nut returns, N-U-T, nut returns, end of trip. Oren says, quote, "Just trying to make sure I get max returns. Was going to come for that Sunday night tax and make sure all girls make quota," end quote. Male 1 says, quote, "LOL, the whole $500 on a flight," end quote. And Oren says, quote, "No free rides under my watch. That's more than most of us ever spent on girls. Just want to make sure we get a good ROI. ROI means return on investment." So despite engaging in this kind of behavior and acts of sexual violence for decades, until earlier this year, the Alexander brothers' conduct went largely unchecked. Indeed, according to this memo, the Alexander brothers knew that it was very important, very critical, to make sure that none of their victims ever went public. For example, in January of 2021, Oren and Tal Alexander had the following exchange. Oren says, quote, "Start to think about reputation you want out there. We are on top of the game, and only thing can bring us down is some hoe complaining," end quote. And Tal responded back, "Understood. Did someone complain? End quote. So at this point, I think what happened here is these men, I don't really want to call them men, they're not men. These people, are they people either? I don't know, they suck. So these guys, they were engaging in this behavior for a long time, right? High school, college, early on in their career, especially as they started getting more powerful, especially as they started getting more money and they realized it was easier to do because you're wearing a mask of somebody who looks successful, who looks like they got their shit together. Like I said, attractive maybe. So these women aren't going to think, you know, that you're a dangerous sexual predator. It's a very common misconception that attractive, successful men don't need to do this kind of thing. But once again, it's not about
that's what they
sex. It's not about being able to get sex. It's not about being able to find somebody who wants to sleep with them. It's about finding somebody that they think needs to be put in their place and exerting their power and dominance to show this woman that she's nothing the way they see her, the way they want her to see herself. So this memo says that even when the victims did complain, the defendants would take steps to stop victims from reporting. The government is aware, for instance, of at least one occasion in which Tal and Oren filed a police report alleging harassment against a woman who has described being forcibly digitally penetrated by Tal while Oren was in the room. Tal also threatened that victim with a defamation lawsuit if she did not stop telling people that he and Oren had sexually assaulted her. And at least one other victim reported that Tal made threatening statements to her after she told other people that he drugged her. Tal likes to do that, right? He did that with his tennis friend in high school, where he was like, I'm going to cut your brake lines and I've got a hit out on you or a bounty on your head.
Sick bastard.
Yeah. This timeline so far has gotten us to 2016. The allegations do not stop there. They continue. In fact, the latest one I could find, I believe, was in 2021, and it's kind of like when Oren's here, like in 2021, thinking, hey, we gotta maybe think about our reputations now. We're building things. We're at the top of our game, and we can't let the things we've done in the past affect us. Once again, all three of these men, I hate calling them men, but all three of these men had girlfriends and wives and were in relationships, especially around this 2021 period. They were, you know, putting together the lives that they wanted, and they didn't want all of the things that they did to the women they deemed to be less than, to be disposable, to be basically stock, to be transported around into different states and different countries for their approval and their sexual pleasure, for their games of control and manipulation. Now they, you know, were in a good place with their careers. They were rising. They were opening official partners. They were married to, you know, different women. And I think it was Oren Alexander. His wedding was in like Vanity Fair. There's so much more to talk about, but I know that this video has gone long as it is. So let me know, do you want a part 2 where we can talk about more the rest of the allegations?
So y'all probably wondering what happened after all that information right there. If you made it to the end, here's what happened.
3 brothers, all convicted, Alon, Oren, and Tal Alexander, found guilty of all counts, including sex trafficking, sexual abuse, and sexual exploitation of a minor. All 3 brothers choosing not to testify. Now they could face up to life in prison for their crimes. The trial taking place in a Manhattan federal courtroom over the last 5 weeks. The jury returned a verdict after 20 hours of deliberations. 11 women testifying against them, all accusing one or more of the brothers of sexual assault. Some even claiming they were raped. 8 of the women said they were drugged. The brothers' defense saying the men may have been promiscuous womanizers, but they weren't criminals or rapists, adding their behavior was in trafficking. It was dating and hooking up.
We believe in our client's innocence, and we're not going to stop fighting until we prevail.
It's a fall from grace. 2 of the brothers were once high-end real estate brokers, and the third, a private security executive.
These guys lived a world of ultra-luxury. Their clients were some of the richest and most well-known people in the country. And in order to work in that world, they also embodied that world. They partied in the Hamptons, they partied in Miami, they partied in Aspen. They really were living the embodiment of this luxury dream that was very much tied to the brand of real estate that they sold.
Sentencing will happen later this year.
Thank you for tuning in for this presentation of the Alexander brothers. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when I drop new content. Be good to yourselves. Be good to others. Protect and maintain your peace at all costs. What are your thoughts? Put them down in the comment section. Until the next one, I'm gone, y'all. Church!